Hey, today I wanted to show you how to make one of these concrete bases. Here's a mantis warrior that I painted up. My friends were talking to me about different basing styles, and I came up with this kind of cool option. It's really cheap and really easy to do. So with that being said, let me show you how to make it. You're going to go ahead and grab a pencil, an X-Acto knife, or a utility knife. As long as you can cut with it easily, doesn't really matter what you use. You're going to also need some craft paint. I have a dark gray here, a lighter gray, and like a bone color. I found a vanilla, seems to work. Also need super glue, your base, some aluminum foil rolled up into a ball, and some foam board. I have a piece that's left over from another project that I figured I'd use. And you're going to contemplate and see what else you need. And then remember, you left the other stuff on another table. Then you're going to go ahead and grab some of this black craft paint. And you're also going to need some Mod Podge. It's probably what's the most important in this build. I use a Black Magic Craft style of Mod Podge. Just mix some black paint into your Mod Podge. But it's going to help us later. You definitely need it. Alright, go ahead and get your foam board. And don't forget the most important step. You're going to do this really cool flip. Oh, there you go. Testing it for toughness. Yep, it's tough enough. Let's go ahead and grab one of the bases. And don't forget the super glue. What you're going to want to do is use the super glue around the trim of the base. You want to make sure you focus on the trim because that's where we need the most support from the actual foam board. Also, don't take the paper backing off the foam board yet. We need to make sure that's on so this way the foam board doesn't melt when the super glue makes contact with it. I went ahead and put it into one of these corners so that later when we cut it out, we have some extra foam board left over that I could use for another project or more bases. Alright, go ahead and get your cutting board. You're definitely going to need a cutting board so you don't mess up your table, even if it's a really bad looking cutting board like what I have. Alright, then go ahead and grab your knife. You're going to cut around that. I use a utility knife just because it was right there next to me. You could still use the X-Acto knife or anything else as long as it can cut. Make sure you cut deep enough or else it won't come off immediately. So go ahead and do that. Now that you're done with that, you just kind of rip it off. And there you go. Alright. The next thing we're going to want to go ahead and do is grab the base and start ripping off the top paper part of the foam board. It doesn't come off immediately sometimes, so you kind of have to go back in and rip it again. But as long as the foam board there is exposed, that's what we want. So make sure, go back through it, rip off as much as you can. And as soon as you see that foam board is exposed, get your aluminum foil ball and start to texture it. You could texture it as much or as little as you want to. Really depends on you. I tend to just kind of go as much as I can. The harder you do it, the more indentations it shows. But it's really up to you. Alright. Now that you're done with that, get your knife and just start trimming off the sides. So we're going to just kind of clean up a little bit and just trim around it. So this way the foam board fits the base, so it's nice and circular. Sorry I did this off camera, but I thought I was in focus, but I was not. So go ahead and just do that. Pretty easy. You want to use a nice sharp blade too, just be careful. Alright, let me show you how it showed out. Pretty good. You could also use the knife to kind of take chunks off the side of the foam board. I didn't do it here, but you could definitely do it. Alright, go ahead and start making some cracks into the foam board. You don't have to, but I like doing it. So So you're just gonna kind of score the foam board itself with a knife, doing zigzag patterns, or I usually do like a Y-shaped pattern with different cracks kind of going off into their own side. Now grab the pencil and go into those cracks that you just made. What this does, it'll open up the crack a little bit more since the knife is so thin. The cracks itself don't really show up that great if you just leave it like that. So going in with a pencil will actually widen the gaps, and it'll actually look like it's cracked. So you definitely want to do that as well. And go as heavy-handed or as light as you want. Really depends on what type of base you wanted to use. Alright, go ahead and get a crappy brush and get your Mod Podge. Obviously you don't want to use your perfect brush for this. We're just going to be dabbing some of this Mod Podge over the foam board. What this does is it gives it a protective layer so that later when we finish painting we could put the model on without the foam board melting, since you're going to be using super glue. So go ahead and just paint, make sure all of the white is gone, and then wait for that to dry. It'll take a little while. As soon as it's dry though, we can get ready to paint it. Alright, go ahead and get your paint. We're going to start with a darker style of paint. Like I said, I use a dark gray. Kind of use this piece of miniature box that I had laying around as a palette. Get that gray and just start going over it. Make sure you cover all the Mod Podge so none of that shows up later and looks weird. Alright. And then once you're done with that, we're going to wait for that to dry. Doesn't matter if it gets around the edges, it's fine. Alright, check and see if it's dry, and let's start to dry brush. I get the lighter gray. I have a piece of paper offhand, just paper towel. Kind of got rid of most of that paint, and then went ahead and started to dry brush it. Sorry again, I thought I was in camera, but I was not. So went ahead and just kind of went around the edges, did a little bit of the top. You're gonna see how it looks now that it's done. There you go. Alright, once that's dry, go ahead and get the vanilla paint and also get rid of the excess on the paper towel. Once it's good enough, go ahead and go around the trim of the area, kind of hitting and feathering the sides. And then I do a little bit on the top too. We're going to bring all that down later with a shade. I forgot to mention this before, but you should have shade if you're basing. So I use a handmade shade. It's just some black ink. I think it's water and Floaid or matte. I don't remember, but I use some of this and use some of that aluminum foil as a cup, kind of went over the cracks. The most important thing is to get the shade into those cracks. As you can see here, I didn't get that much in there, so I went ahead and just got some more shade, put it into that makeshift cup, and then just dabbed a bunch onto the actual base to make sure that it got into those cracks. That's what's actually going to make it pop. And you can see here I put a little bit too much shade there, but that's fine. I just dried off the brush, made sure it was dry enough so this way it could soak up some of that excess shade that's towards the top. And I just kind of dabbed it a little bit. There you go. And then now we're just going to wait for that to dry. And once that's dry, we can move on to the final steps. Alright. Now that I saw that it was dry, I grabbed some of that black paint and carefully went over the plastic part of the base, and just to clean it up. So at this point, you're pretty much done. As long as you have your miniature ready, once you're done with this part and it's done drying, you can just glue it onto the top of it. Like I said before, that Mod Podge is going to kind of act as a barrier between the foam and your miniature. So just use a normal amount of super glue. I haven't tested it, but I don't think it'll melt if there's a lot of super glue on there. I just use the normal amount like you would put on a normal base, but I haven't tried putting a mountain of super glue on it yet. This is interesting. Might try that later, just to test it. Here's some models I ended up basing. If you like what you're seeing, like this video and subscribe. But most importantly, have fun.